This is the Gauntlet Podcast. My name is Lowell. I'm joined by my co-host, Sherry Stewart.
Good morning. I hope you had an excellent game at some point this month.
Oh, what a nice idea. And we're also joined by our guest this month, a regular Gauntleteer and a game designer, Ollie Jeffrey. Hello, Ollie.
Hey, Lowell. Hey, Sherry. Pleasure to be here. How you doing?
Doing pretty well, and we had a great month of gaming in April. We're going to, in our first segment, talk a little bit about that. So, Sherry, how was April for your games?
You know, I took it a little bit light because April is a month where my work tends to be particularly crazy times. I'm glad I did it, and I'm sad I did it. What games I played were all excellent, but not as many as I would have liked. This month, I got to play Trail Cthulhu, Urban Shadows, 13th Age, and Bat Hack off Gauntlet, but on Gauntlet, sadly, I only was playing in one series. It was excellent, Tales of the Loop, but it was only one.
So tell us about that, he said, with bated breath since I ran it.
I know.
Tell me anyway.
It was so easy and so lazy of me, but it is always a fun game. It's a very simple, sort of lightweight Tridindle system, similar to Mutineer Zero, which is also by Free League. It's sort of meant to evoke a nostalgia for the age of 10 to 15-year-olds in the 80s, or with mostly 80s-like tech, but also some other additional strange tech on the side, like mag lifts. And so there's a sort of separate industrial tech level that's going on in there. That's important because the setting has a sort of massive particle collider that has recently been built in the area around the town that the kids live in. So mysterious events have been happening. So this is sort of a kid investigation game. It mixes home life, group hanging out, and lightweight investigation and action. So what I love about it is it's one of those games where it's about being kids. You've all got problems, so you are struggling. So it's got those sort of insecurities and kid interactions where they are friends, but there's also a sort of, they're at the age where everything is being redefined for them, or they're redefining it themselves at school. Things are changing. And of course, in the world that they're in, things have changed a lot too for everyone around them. So there's a lot of thematic echo and resonance to that. Yes?
So I was just going to say there was a big surge of those kind of like kids in peril games after Stranger Things, wasn't there?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. But Tales from the Loop seems to be the one that broke free.
Well, it did, and I had the impression that a big part of that was, the art that came with it, which is just gorgeous and so evocative. But the other thing is it felt to me like that was in production a little bit, well before Stranger Things sort of came onto the scene.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's a zeitgeist thing.
Yeah, and it was just sort of, they were lucky that the two things kind of popped into being right at that time.
Am I right in thinking that the game is based on the art, that the art was pre-existing and then they based the game on it, or have I got that wrong?
That is correct.
That is correct. Yes. And so some of the things that I dig kind of feed from that, and some of the things that I'm less sure about also feed from that. The one thing is they managed to write a system that has all the room for those feels, for those early teen or just teen years. The system gets out of the way in a lot of ways. And if you've played Mutineer Zero, you would know that the dice system is it's a few stats, and you have some abilities, and you're rolling dice and hoping that the number of dice within that number, you get a 6 on it somewhere. What this system does is it gives you luck based on your age. The younger you are, the more you get in luck. The older you are, you get a little bit more skill. And so you do have this chance for rerolls, which is a little bit different than Mutineer Zero, or you can add bonuses by invoking your special items, things that you hold dear to you, or things that are your pride. So you've got a little bit of dice manipulation, but one of the things that's a little bit weaker is that when you do fail, you take conditions, and to get rid of them...
Well, I'm going to correct you on that.
Oh, sorry.
Here.
Good. No, do.
So failure is like a PBTA state where something happens when you fail. The way that you take conditions is if you've used up luck or you don't want to use your luck and you ask for a reroll, you have to mark a condition.
Oh, okay. For some reason, I think what it was is we always failed when we tried to do that, which is why
Yes.
I apologize. And then I will say, in the game, every time someone did that, they failed. So that was just awesome. So I do associate it with that. But you have these conditions, and you're supposed to clear them by going to speak to someone that's close to you in your family. And it's weird because the conditions are things that don't actually speak to that. They're things like hunger and tired and things like that, instead of being insecure, isolated, things that would actually be something that you would go to an adult to speak to.
Is it just trying to get you to do those kind of scenes? Because otherwise you might just do the adventure stuff without ever doing the kind of the family life stuff, which is also part of that genre, and it's just trying to encourage you that way, but it doesn't quite work.
Yeah, exactly. It's like if they had just chosen different condition names, it would have been more kind of giving you that guidance in why you were doing this thing. So it is a very odd little detail that just seems like a missed opportunity. But it's also a very loose system. The whole thing is that you're not supposed to die if you're a kid, but there's also not much chance that you will. There's not the stake to it. So the dice is not bringing a lot of risk to the game. All of that comes in the narrative and in the way that you choose to play your character. Of course, I was playing on the Gauntlet, so all of the players were dynamite, and we were all out there and really working our poor little kids over the coals. And it was amazing and fun and full of, you laughed and you were crying through, and you were laughing through the tears. I mean, it was just a lot of really sad or excellent, even triumphant moments, and sort of funny, weird, embarrassing moments. And it has been a lot of fun. So I had a great time. I think that the best thing I can say about the system is that it is lightweight enough to get out of your way, and it allows you to do the basic steps of defining your character so that you have a good sense of who it is when you go in. That's mostly what I need from a game, so it's good, but it doesn't bring anything more to it.
There's an interesting thing that I want to take a second to talk about, because one of the things that's going on with that game, and it's actually a little bit more in its sequel, Things from the Flood, is that it has those conditions, and those conditions are supposed to be a thing that puts pressure on you. You've got 4 of them. If you take 4 of them, you're broken. Each one you take is a -1 ongoing. That's supposed to be something that happens, that occurs, because I think the game expects you to be rolling a lot more than I have the players roll.
Because it's targeted at quite a trad audience, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes, and it is that sort of trad thing with all the narrative on it, and it's like it hasn't quite bridged that if you're doing the narrative, you're not going to do as much of the trad roll every time you do an action.
And I think that's the thing, is we've got these games that have these economies that are built on number of rolls or roll checks or anything like that. And once you have that in a game, you're making a certain assumption about how many rolls per session you're getting.
Yeah.
How many rolls per hour, that rate.
Yeah.
You're running the game in a much more talky mode like we do. It means that pressure economy is just not there.
Do you know what I don't think I've ever seen in a game, actually, is an indication of how often you should roll. Like in Dungeon World, when you look over a scene or whatever. I think that would be really useful as a GM tip, actually, is you should probably be rolling every X minutes. Yeah. I mean, obviously you can't fake that, but, sort of drive the narrative so that you have to.
Yeah, and maybe say the assumption for the experience economy or the assumption for building up your fate tokens or whatever is that there's this many rolls. I mean, I know, like, when I run fate, the economy is usually not the big driving thing, whereas I played it with a designer at a table, and we were constantly, that was a resource thing that we were dealing with.
Okay.
But yeah, I would like designers to think about that. But Sherry, how do you feel about that as a player, with what I'm saying?
As a player, I'm fine. I'm fine with no risk because, like I said, on the Gauntlet, you're bringing all of it. I mean, you have this minor toss-off little sad thing that happened in your life, and when you're playing in the Gauntlet, it's like everything revolves around that, all of your reactions, and everyone else is doing things to evoke that moment, so you're feeling sad about it all the time. I mean, it is just how the players lead into things in there. They want those moments of resonance, and they're just there to bring them for you and for everyone at the table. And so how do I feel about it? I'm great with it.
Ollie, do you have any questions?
I do actually, yeah. It's about the sequel. So the sequel, Things from the Flood, that's set in the 90s, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's a direct sequel. Now, if there's been all this weird alien and kind of like, is it almost like post-apocalyptic, the second one, as far as I understand?
It is, and here's the thing is, and I think Rach Shelke said this best, that the art books are much darker than the actual game is. Okay. And if you're just looking at the art books that these originally came from, you might have a different expectation than you actually get. And I expected Things from the Flood to be much more post-apocalyptic.
Because I heard it's a lot darker.
It is darker, but it's more dark because of the teen issues, I think, than... I mean, the setting is definitely darker. Things have gone wrong. There's lots of sort of fallout that has occurred.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's not post-apocalyptic. It's a bad scene.
Okay.
And if you look at the Things from the Flood art book,
it's post-apocalyptic.
You think that these are savage Lord of the Flies kids with robots,
Yeah, but if you look at the character books, they're like Raver and Rocker. So if that's so if that's what the post-apocalypse is, someone
like their cyberpunk.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
How does it place it in the 90s? Because one would assume that like if stuff has gone off in the 80s, then like pop culture would have gone off, and without pop culture references and political references, how do you even tell it's the 90s?
Oh no, it definitely has all of that.
Oh, okay.
But here's the interesting thing: it's a Swedish game.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things is the touchstones that it is really using is the 90s in Europe, not the 90s in America, which is Sunshine and Bill Clinton. It's all of the economic problems and downturns and things like that.
Yeah. Lots of civil war in the 90s, yeah.
Yeah. And the Swedish setting has a lot of stuff about Bosnian refugees and things like that.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, that was a major feature in the 90s. It was recession over here, and then in Europe you have lots of countries breaking up, you have civil war, ethnic cleansing. You might need to edit that out. I'm not sure if that's too dark, but there was a lot of dark shit going on in the 90s in Europe.
Yeah, and I think the problem is that as a result, for me, when I ran Things from the Flood later, I had to say, well, what's happened has really made the U.S. like what was happening in Europe at that point.
Okay.
But I think the Europeanness of the setting really comes through, actually, I think even more strongly in Things from the Flood.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's really interesting.
Sherry, anything else you want to say about it?
No, except that I'm having a lovely time, and for all my fellow players, you're the best. The best.
Except that next session is the last one of that, and then we move forward 4 years to Things from the Flood.
Well, I will tell you, if I had to do Things from the Flood with any crew, this is the crew. So,
are you going to bring the same characters through?
Oh yeah, that's the thing, is we're going to age forward.
Nice.
So that's sort of exciting. Also, there's a big Pinterest contest to see who can find the best, 4 years older looking character from your kid pictures. This is a competition, an important competition.
Yeah. No, very important. We were doing that with when It came out to try and pick who should play them in the second movie, and I'm so surprised they didn't get Kristen Wiig to play the I can't remember what the girl character is called, but she just looks exactly like young Kristen Wiig.
Yeah, Jessica Chastain does not quite match up.
No,
there.
No.
Though the new trailer dropped this week, or at least the teaser bit, and that certainly freaked me out.
Yep.
It was. Yikes. But we'll save that for DeGoya County in the future. Ollie, how was your April?
Yeah, my April was really good. So off Gauntlet, I was playing Cult, so more Swedish 90s-ness, although that's actually a game from Sweden in the 90s. This is it's the 4th edition, which has gone PBTA, and I think that's the first kind of previous existing game that's converted to PBTA, which is really cool.
Yeah. Oh, I do have to mention, Cult appears as a cultural touchstone in Things from the Flood.
Oh, does it?
They mention it repeatedly. Yeah,
it was a big deal in the early 90s. It caused like their version of the Satanic Panic.
Yeah,
kind of slightly more reasonably because it's a full on game.
Oh yeah.
You look at D&D and you're like, really? They were reacting to this, and then you look at Cult and you go, okay, they were reacting to this. That's fair. Yeah, so it's fun. It's very trad in its take on PBTA, but I kind of like that because I've been playing for years. Also, I did a LARP, a fantasy LARP called Chaos Gate, which my friend ran. Took my son along to that and ran about with foam hammers. And I've also been playing Hero Quest with him as well, which is a delight. We dug out my old Hero Quest.
Oh,
on Gauntlet. Played a lot of playtests of Quietus, so thank you very much to everyone who joined me in that. And played a couple of classic Vincent Baker games, so The King is Dead and Murderous Ghosts. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Murderous Ghosts.
I'm really curious about this. I've heard so much about it, but have never played it.
Okay, yeah. So it's a fairly classic story game by Vincent and Mackay Baker. It takes a kind of a choose-your-own-adventure path. So the GM has a playbook and the players have a playbook. But they're nothing like PBTA playbooks. They are more like Choose Your Own Adventure or Fighting Fantasy books where they have numbered paragraphs that tell you what to do. And you take turns back and forth between you and the players. So we were playing the second edition, which makes it a tiny bit more like a regular RPG. There's a little bit more freeform stuff for the MC. And it also changes the setting to be in a hotel. It's like it's a creepy old hotel, which I think is I think it works better because it's more generic. The original, I think, was set in an underground factory, which is like very specific. And I think he had like a place that he had actually been in mind when he designed that first one. But the second one, you can just steal stuff from The Shining and The Innkeepers, so it's good for that. It's more sort of generically freaky, which I liked. And the second edition also makes it a party game. But I'm not quite convinced on that, so we'll pick up on that in the things that I'm not sure about. I've had a really good time. I had great players again, which helped. It's really, really creepy game because it kind of just sets you straight in. It kind of goes, you're in a haunted hotel, something terrible has happened here, and as soon as you get in, it's just straight in. You see evidence of terrible violence. That's what the MC is told to describe. And then you have to ask the player if that implies, I think it's like cruelty. I can't remember what the other options were because I know my guys chose cruelty, but it's and then you continue on from there. So if depending on which option they choose, it then sends the MC off onto a different page, and you kind of keep going back and forth from there. I really liked that it's short, which isn't necessarily a good thing, but I like that there are short games out there because normally you have to set aside 2-3 hours to play a game. With this, it said it should take about an hour to play it, and it was exactly an hour on the mark, so that's pretty impressive. Wow. Yeah, and it tells you everything that you need to do. So as long as you've got those playbooks and you've got a pack of cards, it's almost prepless. I mean, it says you can just kind of read it live essentially and never have seen it before. I think that would be a little bit odd, like because it's quite stop-starty as it is. I think if you were trying to do it without any idea what you were going into, there would be a lot of silence.
Oh, okay.
But it's if you've got it in your back pocket, it's really good for sort of like quick, like a pickup game basically, and for also for people who haven't necessarily played a role-playing game before. So it'd be good for like horror fans who fancy trying it, but you don't want to drop them straight into funny shaped dice and everything like that. You just got a pack of cards.
Right. Oh, that's a great point.
And the other thing that I really dug about it is because it kind of links into it telling you everything that you need to do. And there's a constant conversation about what is PBTA, because there's no particular definition of PBTA. Vincent Baker's definition is kind of whatever you want it to be. And then there's what's often taken as 2d6 playbooks, moves, GM moves, the conversation, all of the things which turn up in those early first wave PBTA games in particular. But I think, presuming that the games that Vincent and Mackay label as PBTA, they're doing that in good faith and not just kind of like slapping it on everything that they put out, which they also do. But that's I think what PBTA means from them is that it's them telling you how to GM in a way. because Dungeon World, Apocalypse World are all very heavy on like mechanizing prep and mechanizing how the GM reacts and stuff like that. I've also played The King is Dead recently, and it does a similar thing. It's kind of like it's telling you exactly how to do all of these scenes, and then Murderous Ghosts is like, if I'm right about this interpretation of what PBTA is, and it's a very controversial topic, people often tell Vincent Baker that he's wrong, despite the fact he made it up, including probably me. But yeah, if it's this showing you how to GM, Murderous Ghost is a really excellent tool for like a novice GM, because it outlines everything you need to do and it tells you exactly how to do it. So when it says you see evidence of violence, go... Don't be vague about it. Be as nasty as possible. And then if that happens again, it says it needs to be even more clear what's happened than previously. And then it also says don't do this a third time. It won't drive the story forward. So it's even more than the GM moves in Apocalypse World and Dungeon World and all of those. It really guides you through the whole thing, which is way it works as a kind of a prep plus game, essentially.
That's really interesting. Did you feel constrained by that at all?
In a way, yes, but at the same time, I think it's nice because I wanted something that was very low prep. As I said, I'd run a bunch of stuff on Quietus, and I kind of wanted to just have something to chill out with, effectively. And so it was nice to kind of have that weight taken off my shoulders, because I've been a GM for decades now, because I'm old. But the reason that when I read Dungeon World first, and it was kind of like scales coming off of my eyes. It was like, oh, I don't need to prep anymore. I can just have these rules do it for me. So I do love that, and this is an even more extreme version of that. Essentially, it's like it's not just telling you how to GM, it's telling you how to GM at this point that you are at now, because you're on page X right now. If anything, I had to find myself kind of reining myself in, because I realised that some of the stuff I was doing was just me doing my normal GMing shtick, and I wasn't actually doing what it said to do in the rules. And I was like, okay, no, let's play it as it's meant to be played, because otherwise we're going to go off piste. And I had to occasionally, I was like, oh, hang on, I'm GMing. I have to go back and start again and like reframe that scene.
So overall, now let's go to the segment where we talk about what you're less certain about, not sure about with this game.
What I was less sure about, because you're reading as you go. Even if you've prepped it, you don't necessarily know what choices the player's going to make and which paragraphs they're going to send you to. So it says it's a party game, but it's even more than a regular role-playing game. It's very stop-starty. There's not much flow to it, because you have to read your section, they have to read their section. So it feels a little stilted sometimes. And the other thing is they called it the party game version. It was the second edition that was released via his Patreon. But the only thing that goes any way towards that is that you decide everything collaboratively. It's not like take turns. So it's,
okay.
Which I think would probably make more sense if it was just go around the table. Have you played Lovecraft-esque, either of you?
No, I haven't.
It's very good. I would recommend it. But particularly on everyone's go, whenever it goes around, everyone has a specific role. So it's like a rotating GM role and a rotating player, but all of the players that aren't currently the lead character have another role to play in that, and you've got little cards to hand around and pass around to show you what you should be doing at X point. Whereas here it was just, there was a little bit of me going, okay, so Patrick hasn't spoken in a while, so Patrick, you make this decision, or kind of like, so what do you think altogether? And it kind of breaks up the flow a little bit. I think it might be, again, with that kind of like intro to GMing, intro to playing kind of view on it, it might be to provide a little bit of cognitive distance, so that you don't feel that you really have to get behind your character's eyes because you're discussing it together. And it might be a good way of getting people who are a little shyer, or people who aren't used to like really heavy improvising, is you can still feel like you're contributing, but without having to come up with this beautiful monologue just off the top of your head, because everyone does it.
Lowers the risk.
Exactly.
The social risk. Yeah.
And in terms of lowering the risk as well, one of the things I meant to mention about a thing that I liked actually and I forgot was that it has an inbuilt safety tool. So again, it's that kind of the intro to playing, intro to GMing, because any time that the player has a choice, they can choose that it was all a dream and they wake up and the game stops. So it's kind of a mechanized open door policy within the game itself.
Oh, neat.
something will happen in the game, and then the player has to tell the MC something about their past, but the things that they say aren't necessarily that connected. So it was like, tell me something that you wanted to do before you die, and it's not clear if that is the addressed to the character or addressed to the player, and it doesn't tie necessarily into what's happening right now. So it's not, tell me how this reminds you of something you wanted to do before you die. So,
oh, okay.
I mean, we tied it in because the player wanted to go scuba diving, and they ended up being drowned by murderous ghosts. So we got it together a little bit, but that's because it's the Gauntlet, and we play well, but it's not there in the text. Yeah, the other thing I would say about it is design-wise, is it kind of feels, and I had this issue with the King is Dead as well, it kind of feels like they're the playbooks for a larger game. It kind of feels like you should have a book explaining how this works, and then the actual game that you get is just like the thing that you print out to play it. But it feels like there could be like a larger, glossier, more gay, more product-y, if I could be horrible and capitalist, more product-y version of that. But I just don't think they're interested in making those games, which is a shame, because I'd love to have like a glossy version of Murderous Ghosts, or a slightly glossier version of the King is Dead, and also just some more like support text around it. All of that said, I had a brilliant time with it. It's a great spooky game. It's very simple. And it's, I think it's, like I said, it's a really good one for beginner GMs and beginner players.
Sherry, do you have questions?
I think that my first question is when people are playing it and they're talking about what they do, are they constrained in those choices? Is it like a set of decisions that they're given, or can they, kind of say, well, we run towards, the boiler or the boiler room or something like that? I mean, how are the decisions or the choices that they have given to them?
Yeah, it varies actually, and it varies per the paragraph that you're on in the book. And again, I think that's meant as kind of like an intro thing, because sometimes it's just ask the players what they do, and sometimes it's like ask the player what they hope the ghost doesn't do, reach out to them, call them by their name, it's something like that, and then they choose and you go from there. So I think again it's giving people a bit of a taste of different styles of playing. So sometimes the GM will ask you specifically what you're doing, and it'll be that little bit harder framed. And sometimes there'll be that thing like, tell me something you wanted to do before you die, stuff like that. But sometimes it's just ask the players what they do. And then in the GM section, it says, let the players do whatever they're doing, describing what happens until you get bored, at which point introduce a ghost.
Which is fine advice. But yeah, I was wondering how much freedom there was, because it sounds like it has a little bit of introduction to like the decision making, and some handrails around like the things that you need to do, but it's mostly like support for the players to, if they aren't comfortable or haven't done this, of what appropriate reactions there are, what they have permission to do.
Exactly, yeah, and I think that's probably the point of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it is a little bit handraily, as you say, and there's very little choice. And I don't think it has to be, is the thing either. I think you could very easily hack this into like a more traditional PBTA hack of Murderous Ghosts. But I think that would be losing the point of it, essentially, which is to have something which is definitely this, even down to like the setting. You don't even get to choose the setting or that much about your character, really.
So it's about a fast, good game within a set of constraints delivered every time, which is definitely a valuable thing to have in your back pocket, as you said.
Yes, yeah. It would be hard to do wrong, essentially. I think the worst possible game that you're going to get out of it would be just like a little bit staid. It would just be reading from the text, essentially. If you were to just read from the text, it would still work, even if you were to do any elaboration at all, which I don't think necessarily is true of The King is Dead, because if you don't elaborate on The King is Dead, then it's very flat. There's quite a lot of questions and answer stuff on that. It would be easy enough to just go yes or no, and then that's not very interesting. And you have to elaborate, and it says more about elaboration there. So if you were a player coming to role-playing, or a GM coming to role-playing, I would suggest maybe Murderous goes first, and then The King is Dead, and you kind of like work your way up through into, say, something like Apocalypse World or Dungeon World after that.
Cool.
And listeners, we've talked about The King is Dead previous episodes, so you might check that out in the feed. It's an interesting compare and contrast there.
That's actually why I put it on the calendar, because I heard it was Haley, wasn't it, talking about The King is Dead. I was like,
yeah.
Oh yeah, I've got that. It sounds really good. I shall have to play that. So I put it on the calendar that next day.
Any last thoughts you have about that?
No, I don't think so.
So I had a decent April. Off Gauntlet did Urban Shadows, Trail of Cthulhu, 13th Age, Bat Hack, Hearts of Wulin, that being with some podcasters, and it was exciting there. And then on Gauntlet did Urban Shadows, Tales from the Loop, Things from the Flood, and I only got one session in of it, but I played Liz C's Afterlife Wandering Souls, which I quite liked, because we gave it a Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead vibe.
Nice.
Which I really enjoyed. But I want to talk just briefly about the Urban Shadows Dresden Files game, because it was a request. Blake Ryan had bought at a level for the Codex Kickstarter to have me run 4 sessions, and this is what he chose. So we did Urban Shadows with a slight Dresden Files, Dresden Verse reskinning. And my knowledge is fairly limited. It comes from reading the RPG books, from a couple of novels, and actually from the cooperative card game. So I didn't go for anything fancy. I just cut a few of the playbook options that seemed to me, at least from my knowledge, were a little bit further outside, like the Dragon and the Revenant and the Spectre. I was informed later that, in fact, in the later books, they are absolutely appropriate. But they're also my least favorite books in Urban Shadows. I'd originally thought about doing some custom moves, but I didn't really need to.
Because it's quite heavily influenced by Dresden Files anyway, isn't it, Urban Shadows?
Yeah. Here's the thing is, when I first heard about Urban Shadows and people were talking about it, it certainly seemed like it was the World of Darkness PBTA game. But I honestly don't think it is. I think it is much more the Dresden Files, multiple factions, political stuff, big high-level things, whereas I think a lot of World of Darkness is very much you're in one particular group.
Yeah.
Even when you do the hodgepodge games.
Which never work.
Yeah. They become a party of adventurers rather than the political thing.
Yeah.
So I think it definitely works for it. The request was to set it in Denver because there's a lot of weirdness in the American city of Denver, especially the airport.
Oh, is that the...
Yeah, the airport with the devil horse.
Yes,
and
all of the weird conspiracy theories about it.
Yeah, I watched some of that and I was like, oh, this is truly strange. But in the middle of it, Denver got hit by a freak blizzard in April.
Wow.
Which tied into some winter court shenanigans we already had on the table. So that was very nice. One of the interesting things, and one of the things I like, is Urban Shadows kind of positions the characters in their own separate places, separate elements, separate agendas. In fact, there was a conversation on the Gauntlet just recently about how do we do Urban Shadows to keep people apart, to emphasize that side of things. And that's fine, but I like a game where people are together. Because you set it in the Dresden verse, people have a sense of who the protagonists are. They have a sense that there are good guys, forces of good in there. And I think that just that little skin actually focused the group so that even as they're doing their own things, they were always thinking, okay, how do I cross with the other players? How do I bring these stories together? And it helped that this is an amazing group that really came in hot. Like first session, they knew what they wanted their characters to do. They came in with a strong sense of that and what area they wanted to explore, and it worked. So it was dynamite. But this being, I've run Urban Shadows now a couple dozen times, and the thing that continues to strike me is how absolutely easy it is to just completely forget the debt system.
Right, okay.
Agreed.
It's a key element to the game. Like, it's there, and it's a big set of levers, and there are several moves related to it. But in play, when players are interacting with other players, I have to push them to go, okay, are you calling in a debt? Are you pushing a debt? It was only when another player was sort of acting more hostile as we got in a later session when agendas were clashing, that people were kind of more explicitly doing that. But in this, and then another game I ran of it on the Gauntlet, and then in face-to-face, people are, well, I don't want to have to do that to other players. They want to do the talk. And stopping to go to those debt moves is a break. It is a step aside from the straight line flow of whatever incident you're doing to go and do this thing. The GM has to be prepared for that. And I'm not sure what to do about it. I mean, I think the GM who goes to run Urban Shadows really needs to take a look and decide how they want to handle those debts. I think that's the most important decision they can make. Are they going to lean into them? Are they going to emphasize them?
Could you cut them all together? Is it integral to the game?
I think that you could cut them. I honestly do. It would have a couple of knock-on effects, particularly some of the XP is tied to that,
right,
but not too much. But there are some moves, like the vampire is explicitly built on debts, and there are a few other characters that are built on debts, and once you remove those, you remove some of their abilities.
The other thing is, though, is that you do need them, and they're a big story generator when you're interacting as a player with the NPCs and with the world. Now, whether you're using them with the players, that is one of the things about your sense of them as friends and cohort, which I think that if you wanted players who wanted to be a part, they would need those debts, and that would be part of the storytelling, is that they have to ratchet those debts to get help. So I'm going to kind of disagree with you.
Oh.
I like the debt system. I like that we as a group are slow to use the debts on each other, but when things get to be a little bit unreasonable or someone disagrees, then they will use the debts. I think that it does work. It's just that typically the games that I have been in, the core group tends to play as a group. They're very willy-nilly with debts with each other until they want to do something insane, like actually bring back all their dragon siblings and destroy the world. Then you start getting some arguments. But I do think that it even works in the more loosey-goosey games. So yes, I think if the GM has a real philosophy about it, that will change the feel of that. But I don't think that even working where they're not using it that much doesn't hurt, as long as there are NPCs in the world to interact with.
Yeah, you're right. It may just be that because I see that there are so many moves and so much is built into it, I expect that they need to be a greater part than they end up being with the play style that I'm doing. And that just may be my frustration with it, or my not quite getting it. It's like there's a beautiful set of mechanics there that ought to be generating more than they do in the way I run.
Mm-hmm. Well, and in the way that your players play. So there's two things going on there.
Ollie, have you played Urban Shadows?
I haven't, no. I've got it, but I haven't had a chance to bring it to the table yet. Because I picked it up, much like you said, expecting it to be the PBTA World of Darkness, because I played a lot of, I was a 90s goth, so I played a lot of vampire and werewolf and ghost, not ghosts, that's terrible, wraith, back in the day. Yeah, you couldn't call it ghost, that would be far too camp. Could you do that sort of a game? Could you recapture those kind of 90s games, or was it just fundamentally not cut out for it?
I honestly think that if you played those games, and if you played games with multiple different types like mages and werewolves and vampires, and you had an experience where it was a political game, yes, it would do that. But if that's not your experience with it, then no, because you really can't do, okay, we're all going to play vampires.
Right, yeah.
Unless you'd have to do some serious reskinning to make that work. I mean, I could see where you could possibly do that by just reskinning everything to be a different breed of vampire, but yeah, I don't think it is necessarily that. It's its own beast, and the more I've run it, the more I've enjoyed it.
Is it based off anything in particular? Because PBTA games tend to have sort of like one key thing that you can kind of go, oh, it's that movie, or, stuff like that. But is there a particular Urban Shadows piece of fiction that you would say, watch this before you go in?
I almost have to go with Dresden Files. It has that almost adventure-y, these people can do this, and these do this, and this is how they interact with each other. And the only thing is Urban Shadows doesn't have any sense of there's good guys and bad guys. You kind of all have the potential to be either. Would be
like the Dresden Files TV series or Underworld, where we see two factions and there's a lot of political chicanery going on there.
Okay, cool.
It might work with if you were a big fan of a lot of the urban supernatural, like romancy novels and stuff. It would fit into that. If you wanted to do melodrama with it, you probably could.
That's not a set of things I'm really familiar with, but I wonder how much you could increase the paranormal romance aspect of it.
You could do a mashup
because those always have
mashup of Monster Hearts and Urban Shadows.
Oh yeah,
Exactly.
Although Urban Hearts actually does sound like a romance novel.
Urban Hearts,
yeah.
Let us move on to the next segment of our show, as we're going to talk with our guest about what they're working on.
Hi listeners, I want to tell you about Gauntlet Hangouts. Gauntlet Hangouts is where members of the Gauntlet community go to play games. Our community organizes over 200 online game sessions per month, each of which can be found listed on the Gauntlet Hangouts calendar, and each of which is open to the public. No experience with a game is ever required to play, and most games are run in an open table style, meaning you can join an in-progress series or campaign midstream. Here are some of the games being played on Gauntlet Hangouts in May. Stonetop, Scum and Villainy, Trophy, Mutants in the Night, The Veil, Dungeon World, Masks, Night Witches, Good Society, and Apocalypse World. And that's just a small sample. The best way to get involved in Gauntlet Hangouts is to join the Gauntlet Patreon at the $8 or higher level. That pledge level gets you early RSVP access to new games that hit the Gauntlet Hangouts calendar, as well as the other benefits of Gauntlet membership, such as the Codex Scene and access to our Slack group, where we chat about the games we have been playing. The $8 Patreon tier has limited spots available, but new spots are opened every month on the 15th. So come get involved with the most passionate indie gamers around and experience our legendary Gauntlet play culture for yourself. You can learn more about Gauntlet Hangouts on our website, www.gauntlet-rpg.com, and you can grab an $8 Patreon spot at patreon.com/gauntlet. Thanks.
So, Ollie, you've got a Kickstarter coming up.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've got a Kickstarter which should be launching 1st of June, hopefully, which is, I think, around the time that this is going out. So it's for Quietus, which is my role-playing game of melancholy horror. It's a one-shot game.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So that's why I think Murderous Ghosts appealed to me a little bit. It shares some of that DNA, definitely. So it's a one-shot game. It's a very no to low prep game, and it is for small groups. So again, it's good for that kind of that pickup, that quickly getting something to the table kind of a situation. It works off the Forged in the Dark system, which is any game that is developed from Blades in the Dark, which is John Harper's game of gangs in a haunted city. But I've really pared it down because you have to, because Blades in the Dark is a massive... The thing that people say about it often is lots of moving parts. But I think once you really dig into it, and after having attempted to define PBTA earlier, I'm going to now try to define Forged in the Dark and have more people shouting at me. But I think that the lots of moving parts don't necessarily move together. It's not one big clockwork machine. It's several clockwork machines which stand near each other, and it kind of says that in the Blades in the Dark book. It says that there's the score game and then there's the crew game, and it kind of separates them out. So you do these really tense heists and scores, and then you go off and you plan what you want to do next. But that's like a separate strategy game. So Quietus really concentrates on just the desperate in the now action, and that combined with the flashbacks and the constantly building tension and stress as it is in Blades in the Dark, anxiety as it is in Quietus, just really put me in mind of those movies like The Strangers and Oculus. And I think horror role-playing games, they do a very specific set of things that they've been doing for a while. So we've had so many Cthulhu games. You know, I love a good Cthulhu game, but there's a lot. Yeah. And you've got a couple of like slasher orientated things, but I don't think there's been anything which has done the genre or subgenre really of horror movies that I'm going for, which is that kind of things like It Follows and The Babadook, and even going back to the kind of the French new wave horror movies of the early noughties like Inside and Il, where you've got not only horror stuff going on, but there's also tragedy going on. They've all got this kind of like maudlin air over them, and I think that probably comes from it starting off in France, where it's kind of like a mashup of artsy drama movies where people are sad and also just extreme violence, and that came across into things like The Strangers, and then later on in Oculus, and even down into the recent Netflix version of The Haunting of Hill House, which if something can make you cry and jump then it's a good fit for the kind of thing that you can do with Quietus.
Neat. That's kind of crazy that you pulled Forged from the Dark in that way. That is really sort of genius. To me, that essentially Blades in the Dark is about that mission cycle. So when you were describing it as a horror thing, I had like, what are they going out and doing each cycle?
Yeah. Well, that's one of the things is they're not going out and doing something. It's a one-off event that happens to them. So it usually breaks down into the characters being somewhere that they shouldn't and something bad being there or something bad coming there. And it is an extended version of those heists, which normally play in like an hour and a half. And Quietus can play that kind of level. So again, it's a kind of a quick game. It usually plays about an hour and a half to 2.5 hours. And it just focuses on that constantly building dread and tension, which I think you kind of get in... You get that in Blades in the Dark anyway, but in Blades in the Dark you also know you're super cool badasses with magic powers. So there's always a little bit of a kind of a get at, and it's fun. Yeah, it was on Farrier's Bellows where I think that was when they were talking about Witch, and also when they were talking about Grey Ranks, and they were talking about that something can be enjoyable without being fun, which is like capital F fun, and I think this Quietus kind of falls into that kind of area because it's scary and it's sad, but if you enjoy scary and sad, you can enjoy it without necessarily it being kind of like a kick-ass adventure, which you can play Blades in the Dark as. The other thing that really appealed to me is a lot of these movies have flashbacks because they tend to be kind of like a very isolated thing that's happening to people. So like in The Strangers, which was a major inspiration, you've got a couple who are out in I think it's in their family's old like summer house. They've just attended a wedding, so they're there by themselves. It's out of season, so it's literally like they're the only people there. And then some people turn up and try and murder them for no good reason. They're just bad people. But then we have that, but then we keep cutting back to why they're in this place in the first instance, and it's that they've been to a friend's wedding, which was nearby, and the guy played by Scott Speedman had proposed to Liv Tyler's character, and she'd said no, and so you go back to the house, and they're sort of on the verge of breaking up, and then he's prepared the whole area to look like romantic. There's like flower petals leading up to a bath and stuff like that, and it's just like dagger in the heart and the feels, and then something even more awful happens. So you start off in a bad place and then it just gets worse. But the way that I've mechanized that in Quietus is we have a mechanic called Revealing a Scar. So in Blades in the Dark, you have the flashback mechanic where when you want to, you can change the narrative by paying a bit of stress and bring in something previously in the kind of... The idea is that you would always planned for this, basically. This wasn't a surprise to you. So we don't know that cool heisty version of it, but what it is if you want to get an extra die, because you don't have action ratings or anything like that in Quietus, it's a very low stat game. So if you want to get that extra die, you do something called Revealing a Scar, where you can get the extra die if you tell me a sad story that somehow relates to what you want. And it has to be a story about your character's past. So if you want to bring in any like side characters, like the GM is encouraged not to bring in many side characters apart from the villain of the piece, whoever that ends up being. So I was playing a game with Sabine and Paul Spraggett, and they wanted to bring in one of their father's old hunting buddies. So they told this story about that he took them on this same like hiking trail that they were on now when they were kids, and then he'd met up with his friend and he'd just gone off and get drunk, and so that old hiking buddy ended up like looking after them when they were like little sad kids, and that's how they introduced him as a character who was now in this world and that they could get help and dice from.
It's very interesting. So I like the way you're twisting that flashback. Are we still using like Blades in the Dark positioning and effect and those kind of basics and resistance?
Resistance, no.
Oh.
Because resistance tends to be a get-out clause, and I didn't want to provide any get-out clauses, really, in this. So resistance was in there in the early playtests, as were Devil's Bargains and things like that, but we kind of stripped more back and back until it was more redolent of that genre. So kind of strip back and then push some other features forward. But stress is in there. It's been renamed. It's anxiety, but it's functionally very similar. So you pay it to get flashbacks, you pay it to help people, pay it to push yourself. But in Blades, when your stress maxes out, you are kind of taken out of the scene somehow. But because we didn't want that in a one-shot game, when your stress maxes out, you are panicking. So you can kind of build up and up and up until you can't take it anymore, and then you panic. And that's both kind of in the fiction and in game. So in the fiction, you have to describe yourself being panicked. In game, it means that every roll you take from then on has to be at the desperate level, which is where those real harsh consequences come in. So it's kind of that like last minute death spiral that sometimes happens in those kind of films. And there's two scores which are constantly building up throughout the game. There's one which is despair, which is individual to your character, and on the other side of it you've got hope, because if you don't have hope in horror, then it's not scary, because you can only be scared if you think it might come out okay, otherwise it's just miserable. So you share hope, and whenever you do something which would increase your chances of getting away or increase your chances of defeating the killer, so say you're searching for some keys whilst they're stalking down the corridor towards you, the GM would say prior to you rolling that this will raise your hope if you get for it. If you roll it, you get some hope. If you build it up to 5, then you get away. If your despair ever gets to 5, then you are killed. And that's it. There's no kind of like get up clause at that point. But the rhythm of the game and the currencies of the game tend to keep it so that both of them tend to be at 4. And it comes down to like one last very tense dice roll as to whether you're going to get away or whether you're going to die. And it's gone both ways, and it's very satisfying either way.
That's kind of genius.
Oh, thank you. Don't say that to me.
Really
my ego is big enough already. You'll make my head explode.
Yeah, well, maybe it should be. I don't know. I really like the idea of bringing the pathos into it to inform the horror of what's going on. So to like amp up that sad thing in your past.
Yeah.
And to have the horror underscore its meaning or its significance. That's
absolutely,
great.
Yeah. And it's like you were saying earlier about when in Tales from the Loop, when you have to go back to your parents to talk about stuff to work off conditions, and it's kind of incentivizing you to put those in. And that's what I was trying to do, because in a one-shot, you can't have XP. It's essentially meaningless. So XP would normally be kind of like guiding you to whatever you should be doing. Whereas in this, you always start off with 1 die. You don't have any like action dice to roll. Characters are just created by answering a few questions, which also generates the scenario. Mm-hmm. So you're going to constantly be wanting to push yourself and constantly wanting to reveal those scars, so that we make sure we balance not just the kind of the horror that's happening right now, but it means that you're going to be reaching back for those dice in order to stand a chance of your character surviving, but it also makes sure that you do bring in those melancholy elements. So that it all ties up.
That is really cool.
Is there for framing for this, or is there scenarios? How do people get into the setup? How does that happen? Okay,
so character creation is just a few questions. There are, I think there's 6 questions that you answer, and those generate the scenario, they generate your characters, they generate your relationship to each other. For example, the first question is, you're somewhere isolated, tell me about the place. Then there's a question, why does it pain you to be here? So you're kind of generating those as you go, you develop your relationships with each other, and you can just, much like we were saying about Murderous Ghosts earlier, you can just ask the questions verbatim, but you can elaborate on them as well. So I always encourage people when they're running it to ask additional questions. So I ran a game recently where it was a security guard at an abandoned industrial estate and a kid who was squatting there. So once we decided that was the relationship, we kind of like built up from there, and whether they were aware of each other, whether they were already communicating with each other, and that sort of thing. And so the scenario, in terms of the actual location and the characters, is all generated by the players. And then it's kind of up to the MC to come up with a horror which would make sense in that situation. That can be like a physical horror. So quite often we go with just the Strangers-esque version of just like some bad people that have just turned up and just want to kill you for no good reason. Because there's the line at the end of The Strangers where someone says, "Why are you doing this to us?" And they answer, "Because you were home." And that's one option, definitely. But we've done ghostly stuff. So we did one about a haunted survivalist bunker. We had in the industrial estate, it was a haunted industrial estate. So you can do the like multiple sub-genres within that subgenre. But because there's quite a lot of impetus on the players and the GM to do a lot of like heavy role playing and heavy lifting at the start, because those character creation questions take what would be kind of like the place of the first act of the movie. And then once you sort of get to, I don't want to say playing because the character generation is play, but once you get into like dice rolling and what you do, that's kind of like immediately in the second act or immediately as stuff starts going wrong.
Oh, okay.
And because of that, it is quite, there's, like I said, it's a lot of heavy lifting. So it's not a game that I would recommend for a GM who isn't comfortable improvising. So if you like your PBTA games and if you like Blades in the Dark, then you're going to like this. You're going to like the free-form, no-prep nature of it. But I'm conscious that that's not necessarily everyone's bag, so there are some pre-done scenarios in the book as well.
Oh, good.
Some that's going to be written by me, so I've got one about some twins who have to go back to their father's house after he passes and go through all his stuff, but there's something waiting for them there. And we have some very exciting stretch goal authors as well who are going to be writing additional scenarios. So there's going to be, well, depending on how much people are willing to give, hopefully there will be many exciting stretch goal authors writing scenarios. If not, I think a bit more of that work will be on me, and I'll have to come up with a few more myself. But I don't want to, not because I don't enjoy writing it, because I very much do, but because they've got some really cool stuff planned.
So your Kickstarter is June 1st.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else you want to say about that project?
Can I talk a little bit about the stretch goals and the levels and stuff like that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So the first few stretch goals that we've got Jason Morningstar is writing one called Putnam, which is about a young couple who are about to have a baby and are in a sinister block of apartments. So it's kind of like, it's a cross between Rosemary's Baby without the misogyny, crossed with Get Out. It's very creepy. And Nell Raban, who's working on a game called Home Again, which is a really cool in-progress PBTA game, she is doing a thing based on Filipino mythology, where there are these... and this is a thing that I didn't know about until she said, I want to do something about Filipino mythology. Here's some creatures from it. And I was like, so there are 3 mass strangers who come to your door and give you bad news. So I was like, yes, we are absolutely having that. That is going in immediately. So we've got that. And Alex Roberts is doing the most Alex Roberts scenario possible, which is Sexy Babadook. And the way that she's phrased it is so creepy. It's something like, the thing is, it likes you. Even when it's eating you alive, it softly whispers your name, which just gives me so much squicks. Wow. Yeah. But we've got... so people will be able to get it as a PDF, a softback, or a hardback. And we've got some really beautiful art coming in. Thoitran has done this fabulous wraparound cover where there's a scene unfolding and you can kind of follow it around from the front to the back and kind of get the story of what's happening there. And Kasia Prinzing is doing some really striking kind of high contrast illustrations for the interior. And at the kind of the higher pledge levels, one of the ones that I'm really excited about is you can get a unique cover. So we've got Thoi to agree to do, I think it's 3 of these. Because it's a 2-player game, on the front of the book we have a couple and the killer, and there's like a mask killer on the front. And if you back at that level, you can describe what the killer's mask looks like and get that painted for you by Thoi, and then have that one-of-a-kind version of the book.
Oh, very neat.
Yeah, so I'm excited about that. And there's other similar things. So you can have a picture of you in the book as well, illustrated by Kasia. You can get sessions run by me. So there's, if you're feeling generous, there are lots of cool things that you can get. But primarily the cool thing that you can get is the book, because I wouldn't want to put out a Kickstarter if I didn't love it. I would feel phony and fake, and I wouldn't be able to put the energy in that you need to, because apparently it is a thing, running a Kickstarter, and there are people with their sort of like their Kickstarter blues horror stories. So I needed to be behind it, and I genuinely love this game. It's one of the... I always get the pre-session jitters whenever I'm going to be running an RPG normally, but I don't get that with this because it's so specifically designed to support improvisation from the GM and the players. So you know that whatever you're going to come up with is going to be scary and sad, basically. Which is, if that's your bag, essentially, if you're a goth, buy this for the goth friend in your life, I think is the message there.
Awesome.
Fair enough. Let's move on to our 3rd and final segment. Listeners, it's Giving Me Life. Sherry, what is giving you life right now?
Well, now Ollie has gone and he has done all the work to get a game hacked and into production. I, however, in April, because I was wiped out, but I had promised Lowell that I would do a hack of Blades. So a week before I started it, that I was due, I started it because, of course. And it essentially consumed all of my week because the first thing I had to do was figure out all the machines that were in Blades in the Dark. And there are a lot of them.
There are.
And the whole genius of stripping some of them out is pretty amazing. But I spent that week in a sort of blurry-eyed, just breaking down the structure of the game and the pieces and the levers and all of those things because I'm a DBA. And so essentially defining that game system by its elements gave me something to pin about it. And then I spent 2 days just thinking about it. And then I started typing like a crazy person right into the character keeper. And I'm pretty pleased with how things came out. I essentially hacked Neo Shinobi Vendetta into Blades in the Dark. Right now it's a very literal adaptation of the Blades mechanics in a lot of ways, but it brings the flavor. And actually I amped up the kick-assedness of it because they're sweet ninjas. But I had a lot of fun, and then Lowell ran it, and he figured out how I could watch it live downstairs while he was running it. And it was really fun to watch. The players got it. And so that the players got it, I think, is where I go, okay, I got that first version of the hack right. And now it's just looking for opportunities to make it even more what it needs to be, figuring out what doesn't need to be there and what needs more explanation or articulation or simplification. So, but it got a little fun thing. Of course, there's so much work to get to like where it would actually be production or something you could put in front of someone. But right now it's a fun hack.
Excellent. Someone asked about the Blades in the Dark GitHub because the entire, well, not the entire text, none of the setting text is there, but basically all the rules text is up on John Harper's GitHub.
Mm-hmm.
And the advice I would have is doing exactly what you did, which is don't use that because that's great for like copying little bits that you need verbatim in, but internalize the rules, internalize all of the different machines and kind of start over knowing what they do, kind of build up.
Yep, exactly. It was funny because I played a good deal of Blades in the Dark, but it's not until you go to do that breakdown that you realize how many pieces there are and how they're moving in relation to each other. So yeah. I will be a much better Blades in the Dark player should I play again, too. It was a good experience for that.
Yeah, I think that game
so that was giving me life.
I think that game has a much higher workload for the player than it does for the GM.
Which in some ways is only right and appropriate because the GM is pulling it all together.
Yeah.
And I think that gives the player something to do. So that's kind of what I like about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then Lowell did a cool thing. He added how there's the phases to it. Mm-hmm. He made sure that he added a sort of, there's a downtime, but that's a downtime between missions. Mm-hmm. He also adds your ordinary life.
Oh, okay,
because
cool.
They're ninjas, right? But they have to have cover identity. So they have their cover identity life. And that was genius. So it's a collaboration already.
Nice. Oh, that sounds very exciting. Can't wait to play that.
It was fun.
Ollie, what is giving you life?
What's giving me life is the second season of She-Ra being on Netflix, which is the She-Ra remake, which has been done by Noelle Stevenson, who wrote Lumberjanes, and she's just a fabulous writer and artist. And it's got this lovely look to it. So I've been watching that with my son, and it's just such a joyous cartoon. Like the original was a toy advert and they've somehow turned it into this meditation on friendship and like the damage that parents can do. All of the bad guys are really well rounded and you can kind of see their damage. They're not just mean for no goddamn reason. They're trying to prove themselves to people that they admire in bad ways often. But at the same time, it still has that superhero action. It kind of reminds me a little bit of a Magical Girl series. It's kind of it's the Magical Girl version of She-Ra. And so the action sequences are awesome when you've got all of the princesses turning up their various freeze powers and plant powers and stuff like that, and taking on tanks and the quasi-fascist forces of the Horde. And it's got some really lovely representation in it as well. So one of the main characters has two dads, and it's never commented on. Two of the princesses are a couple. There's a lot of subtext there as well. So even though Scorpia isn't fully out yet, she is clearly into Catra, and there's a bit where I wanted to spend tonight with Catra, but here I am stuck in a closet with you. It's a really good-hearted cartoon, but at the same time it's super exciting as well. Kind of like, it reminds me of like Steven Universe as well, which has similar stuff going on, where you got the feels and also the action. Cartoons these days are taking a really nice trend towards sincerity, which I like. So there's another one which isn't action-packed, but it's called Pinky Malinky, and it's about three friends hanging out who just genuinely love each other and compliment each other, and there's no snarkiness to it. It's just delightful, but it's also so silly that it's still funny. It's not bland just because it's sincere, I suppose is what I'm going for. That's kind of carrying through a lot of cartoons at the minute, and that is very much giving me life.
So what is giving me life is there are a couple of Twitter accounts that I've been following, and each day when the In Otter news comes up with GIFs and pictures of these water sausages, they running around in buckets and juggling pebbles and all of that. There's also Daily Otter and Otter Emergency. I love having those little things in my Twitter feed in between people screaming at the heat death of the United States. So it's delightful. Yeah, it's a good break.
Yeah, that does tend to be Twitter, isn't it? It's kind of like spoilers for something you really wanted to watch, people being furious, rightly so often, and then cute animal pictures from like Owly Fox.
Yes.
The best.
Listeners, that's our show. If you'd like to get in touch with us on Twitter, it's at Gauntlet RPG. We have a website, gauntlet-rpg.com. We're also on Patreon at patreon.com/gauntlet. You can go there to support the show. We have a number of tiers that include access to our monthly zine, priority access for our online games. We have a multitude of podcasts. We also encourage you, if you don't want to necessarily buy the Patreon, please rate and review us on your podcast app of choice, because that really helps us. Thank you, Sherry.
Thank you. It was wonderful being here.
And thank you, Ollie, for coming on to tell us about your project.
Thank you. No, it's been a lovely experience. If this comes out before the Kickstarter goes live, people can sign up to be notified when it goes live at quietus.co.uk.
Awesome. And listeners, that's our show.